All right, for the advanced images assignment, I'm just going to go through step by step and go through the assignment and all the requirements. Typically in class, I would explain some more things about images, and I think I'll do that as I'm going through the steps of the assignment. There are some things that we need to know about pictures, images, on the computer, in our files, and also on a web page. So I will talk about those as I go through the assignment instructions. So the first thing is to open your My First web page. So here's mine as an example, and I've got my 3 images that were on the table from a previous assignment. So those 3 images right now are in the files. So I'm going to go to where my files are for this assignment, and they are in my first web page folder right here. So in web assignments, I created a new folder called My First Web Page. Doesn't matter where yours is, as long as you find the folder that this file is in. My file is right here, My First Web Page, tables, no style 2, and it's sitting right here. And so then my images are in the same folder. That's really important. We've talked about that. And to get them to show up on the page, they have to be here in the same folder location. Otherwise, the code, how we write it, it will not find those images. The browser won't find those images unless we have them in that same folder location. All right, so the first thing for the advanced images assignment, if we have a web page with 100 images, we don't want all those files sitting here in the same folder. So we're going to organize the folders a little bit, and I want you to create a folder specifically for your images. And I already have mine here, but for you, make sure you get to the place where you find your file, and then you can add a folder to that folder here. So this, on the quick access toolbar up here, if you are on Windows, you'll see that little icon of a folder. You can click that for a new folder. Also, if you're in Windows, this home menu right here, tab, it may be open, it may not be, but there it is right there, new folder. Or if none of those work, you can right click and do new folder right there. If you're on a Mac, I think there's some options up here that say new folder, or I think you can right click if your mouse allows it. If you've put that in the settings to allow the right click, you can right click and get a new folder as well. So however you get the new folder, you need to get one and name it images, just like this. Whether it's lowercase or capital doesn't matter. I like mostly lowercase for, well, it totally doesn't matter. Name it images, and then you can select your images and drag them into that folder. So you can hold down Control or Command on a Mac and click and drag that into the folder right there. Mine are already in there, so I'm just going to delete these. So in the images folder now, if I double click on that, I can see all the images that I have, but there are 3 that I'm using in my table. And so now if I do that, once you make that folder and drag the images into it, watch what happens if I refresh this web page. All of a sudden, what happened? Oh, I see, it's reading the wrong one. Okay, just a minute. So if, well, anyway, when you do it, you'll notice that the images went away if you did it correctly. Let me get mine to that point. There we go. Okay, I was reading a previous file. So now, if you refresh it, the images go away. It cannot find them because they are not in the same folder that the HTML file is in. They're in a separate folder. So we need to change the code, is what we need to do. So go into the code, and we have it in the images folder, so it doesn't go looking for any other folder, your image in any other folder, unless we tell it to. So the name of the folder was images. I'm just going to type images. This is in the source of my first image, and then I'm going to do a /, and then it will find that image because I've told it, okay, well, start with the location of where this file is, and then find the images folder, and then find the image called wave.jpg. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back to my folder. No, what am I looking for? The browser. And I'm going to refresh it right here, and then see, look, it found that image because I told it what folder to go to. So I'm just going to quickly do that to the other 2 images. Save it, go back to the browser, and refresh, and then it finds my images again. So that's the first part of the assignment, is to start putting our images in a separate folder. Doesn't matter what you name it. I usually name it images because that makes sense to me. But then whatever you name it, you have to put that in the code so it goes and finds those images. Okay, the next thing with images, we need to know the resolution of images. What is the size? Okay, I've got this width and this height right here in my code, and these are pixels. And so each image has a number of pixels, and then they're measured and they're read and understood by the computer in the browser by how many pixels wide and how many tall. So pixels, let me go back to my images. Pixels, you may or may not know some things about images and pixels. These are digital images. And if I just hover over an image, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on what version of Windows you have and if you have Windows or whatever. But you can almost always right-click on an image and go to Properties, or on a Mac, I think it's File Info. And you can learn how big the pictures are. If I can now click on Details in Windows, and right here the dimensions. So I have a width and a height. Width is always first, 220 pixels wide by 176 tall, and that's a really tiny picture. But on my website, I wanted it small, and it fit for what I wanted. So if I multiply those two together, 220, and that's why the X is there, it's like multiplication in math, multiply it by 176, I'm going to get a certain number. That's how many pixels total there are, the area of the square, right? And so that tells me how much, well, the pixels are one dot of color, really. If I double click this to open it up, and it's really tiny here, but if I zoom in on it, eventually it's going to get blurry or pixelated, as we call it. And eventually it doesn't even let me zoom in all the way. But eventually I'm going to see each color as a dot, every color that's on there as a dot, and those are pixels. And so I have 220 pixels wide all the way across, 220 dots, and 176 tall for that picture. For the wave, look at the wave, it's a lot bigger. It looks better. If I zoom in, it doesn't get pixelated quite as fast or blurry. Okay, in this picture, I can right click on it after I've opened it and go to File Info. Then it tells me on the side here, right there, what the dimensions are. So that's just another way of getting to it. So this one's a lot bigger, 1280 wide by 1024 tall. That's how many pixels are on there. And if I multiply that, I'm going to get over 1 million pixels. And so there's a lot of pixels on this picture. It makes it better, more detailed. Not always better quality, depends on the lens, but that's a good indicator of, I mean, it's going to be better if I have more pixels, more detailed anyway. Okay, so what does this mean for our web page? If I go and, let me do this. If I go back to my code, and if I just take out the width and the height, let's see if I'm going to copy this and then delete it, and then save it. In fact, let me do that with the bigger one. I can see a bigger difference. I'm going to do that with, which one was big? Oh, it was the wave. Okay, good. I'm good. So I'm going to delete that, save it. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh it. Look what happens. My wave just got huge, my wave picture, because I took out the height and the width. And so if I don't specify any size, it gives me the actual size of the image. And so it's really big. It's too big. I don't want it that big. I want it this small. So that's why we put a height and a width to tell it what size we want it to show up in the browser. And really the best way to do it is whatever size we want it to show up, we crop it and resize it in Photoshop or some other program to make it that size, if it's always going to stay that size. But sometimes we want it to show small, and then if you double click on it, it gets bigger to the full size, or it depends on what we want on our web page. So different options there. Now, so if I, in fact, now let me go back to the assignment, what we need, now that you know a few things about picture sizes and pixels. So I want to specify, I want you to figure out the height and width of each picture that you have, each of the 3 pictures, and I want you to make them half that size. Okay, just so you can see how to change them and just for something to do to change them. So the width was, what was it? Let's see, my folder. For my picture, my wave picture, it was 1280 by 1024. So I can either go on the calculator and put those numbers in and divide by 2, or one number and divide by 2, or I can just, if I'm decent with numbers, I can just half that. So I can see that that's 640 by 500 and what? 512. Yeah. Okay, so 640 by 512. So I'm going to go back to my code and do width 640, and then height 512. Okay, that is exactly half the size of the other picture. Okay, I'm going to do that with my other, or I want you to do that with all 3 of your pictures. Actually, just the first 2. The third one, I have a different requirement for it, and I'm going to show that in just a second. I'll save that, go back to the browser, refresh, and then it's a more manageable size for the size of my browser and my web page. Okay, so that's half the real size of the picture. And so the second one I would do also, and that's a lot smaller. In fact, it's pretty close. In fact, that might not, yeah, it's pretty close to the real size. What was it? 277 by, I don't remember. Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I want you to make them half the size of the actual dimensions of the picture. The third one, however, I want it to be just a width of 500. Doesn't matter what the size is, I want the width to be 500. Now, if I did that, that's a little more tricky, because how do I figure out the height if I want the width to be 500? I would have to do some math, and that's good to do some math, and we could do that. And in the past, I've required students to do that math, but computers and the code will do the math for us if we're smart about it. So if I put a width of 500, instead of figuring out, oh, how do I used to have a fraction of, or a ratio of whatever it was, 500, or let's see, on that snowy mountain, I had, let's see, 278 over 181. That's a ratio, right? But if then I want 500, I have to figure out if I want 500 for the width, which is actually replacing the 181, no, I'm sorry, 278, then I have to figure out what the 181 is going to change to keep it in proportions, because if I don't have it in proportions, it's going to be squashed or stretched in some way. So rather than doing all that math, I'm just going to go to the code, and I'm just going to take out this height. A little bit of a cheater way. Okay, and if I do that, if I just put a width, it's going to take the width and make it 500, force it to be 500 pixels, and then it will just keep it in proportion. In fact, I'm going to do it without changing anything. So I'm going to save that, or without taking out the height is what I meant. I'm going to refresh it and watch how badly stretched. Ooh, why did it do it for that one too? Oh, I did change that, didn't I? Okay, I'm going to ignore that. It completely stretched this out because I put the width at 500 and it kept the height what it was before. So I want it to keep it in proportion, right? The height and the width the same, not the same, but the same proportions. And so instead of doing the math, like I said, I'm just going to take out the height, and then it will give me 500 pixels wide, and it will give me the correct proportions. The computer will do the math. We like to have the computer do stuff like that. And what did I save it? I did. Go back here and refresh. See, it keeps it in proportion, so the height and the width match up. Nothing is stretched or squashed out like this one is, and it looks terrible. And so I would go back and say, I want the height there, and the width there. And I'm going to take out the height, although it should be half on yours. The first two should be half the width, and the third one should be 500. Sorry, half the size of the first two, and the width on the third one 500, and just take out the height, and that will work out. But let me just show you that this will go back to normal proportions right there, because it just factors in one of them and it does the math for the other one. So I think that's all we need. the last part of the assignment was to go to your hobby webpage where you have 4 images now and change those the same way. Make sure that they're not squashed or stretched. I've been ignoring it up until now, and it's time that we make sure our pictures are not squashed or stretched. We need to keep them the same proportions. And so we either do the math on it, and that's fine, or we just leave out the height or the width, depending on which one we do want. Speaking of that, just the last thing I'll show you. On the, let's see, whoops, that's not what I want. Let me open this one. Okay, my original pictures, the height and the width, they were perfectly in line, right? Let me show this. Okay, these were all, I wanted them the same size, and it looks like the same size, but if you look at the widths are all different, but the heights are exactly the same, so it makes it look nice and uniform on my table. And so the way I did that is I just made sure the heights were all the exact same number, and then I did the math to make sure the widths were the same number. But like I just said, I could have taken out that width. They're all different, but if I have all these the same, they're going to keep it in proportion to make them all the same width. So there's different things you can do with the heights and the widths depending on what you want and what you want it to look like in the end. So that's the assignment. Make sure you take screenshots as it says in the assignment instructions of the code and of the browser. So here's the code. I want to see all this stuff, and I want to see the browser that the pictures are there.